Trump's top negotiators message for Americans worried the U.S. is siding with Putin. Okay, here it is. This is the interview that people are scared of.
As Trump sends more signals he's losing patience with Ukraine and President Zelensky, his administration, in a proposed UN resolution, is refraining from condemning or even acknowledging Russia as the aggressor in this conflict or expressing belief in Ukraine's territorial integrity. President Trump has elevated his longtime close personal friend Steve Witkoff to the center of some of his biggest global challenges. Witkoff has been a central negotiator with Russia. He met directly with Vladimir Putin. And just before Trump took office, Witkoff negotiated the Israel-Hamas ceasefire and is currently working on phase 2. U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff joins us now. The White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt told reporters yesterday that President Trump feels, quote, very strongly that Russia is willing to make a deal, unquote, and that he's, quote, very confident we can get it done this week, unquote. Is that true? Are you that close to a deal with Russia and Ukraine to end the war completely?
Well, I would say, Jake, just first generally that you're seeing a lot of movement in Ukraine, in the Middle East, and I think it's in large part because people are responsive to President Trump. So, and that's fundamental. I think it's guiding almost all negotiations out there in these sectors. So it's a big data point. Second data point is the way Mark Fogel came out. President Putin, and I commend him for it, was it was a little bit squirrely, you know, on that day that Mark came out. Certain things needed to be done, and President Putin was very, very flexible in his thinking, released him, and I think it was a huge signal to President Trump that he wants to get a deal done. Our conversations...
Okay, but to be clear, the concession that he just expressed that the Russians made isn't to the Ukrainians. And this is the stuff that scares me. Is if the way we get concessions, or the concessions we get, oh, we'll release this American citizen that we grabbed off the street. Oh, we'll release this American citizen we grabbed off the street. Okay, you can have some of the resources that we took from occupied Ukraine. Like, if it slides into that, then at what point is it not, oh, we're actually making the Russians concede? It's no, we're making the Russians pay us for Ukraine. So because, like, if it would be one thing, it was like we got the Russians concede to this, this, and this, but it's, no, we got the Russians to send us a guy, and then we have now conceded on territory, conceded on NATO membership, conceded on, which they then tried to flip-flop back because they realized that giving up that leverage was stupid. They conceded on American troop deployments, conceded on Ukraine being at the negotiating table, conceded on elections in Ukraine, conceded on, and then what do we got? We got one of our guys sent back, who we still had to exchange for a Russian prisoner, somebody who committed fraud, finance crimes.
Saudi Arabia, with the Secretary of State and with the National Security Advisor, were in
which the Saudis said they wanted the Ukrainians there, but the U.S. and Russia said no.
My view, positive, constructive, and clearly momentum building.
What did it get us? What happened? What momentum building? In what way? What did it do? Because this is the thing. These were the scenarios that scare me. The scenario of them basically getting sold to Ukraine scares me. Another thing that scares me is the idea of the Russians dragging this out while stopping American support for Ukraine. So it's like May or June before they're like, okay, now we can really get underway, and then it's just been months of no support, and it's a delaying tactic. It's a delaying action. And so far, I've seen nothing but almost feels like just broadsided, broadside exposed, like, naivete on the side of many of Trump's staff, and from how he talks about, I believe we could trust Putin. Why not, like, trust but verify? Or, no, we can trust Putin.
So I would say that I'm optimistic and positive, just as the president is, that we can get something done rather quickly.
I think everybody watching can understand the need for diplomacy, and especially President Trump wanting to reset the relationship with Russia. But what do you say to the millions of Americans and people around the world who are concerned that the United States right now doesn't seem to understand who actually launched this war against Ukraine and is actually trying to sidle up to the bad guys, Putin and the Russians, while screwing over the good guys, Zelensky and Ukraine. I think that is a fear that a lot of Americans have.
Yeah.
Well, look, I've heard that kind of talk. I don't necessarily agree with it. But let me say this. I'll make a few comments. The first is that the war, irrespective of who started it, needs to end. Too many people's lives have been expunged as a result of it, and it just doesn't make sense to the president. He wants to be the peacemaking president, peace through strength, and I don't.
Unless we're talking about Israel, then just fucking bomb them, bomb them. Woo! Boom, 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 boom. But Ukraine, we need peace. We need love. We need to come together. Didn't we all fight together in World War II? But those Palestinians, it's just silly. Like, no, I don't. Fuck off. I don't believe you. Don't give me that bullshit. He wants to fulfill a campaign promise. That's what he wants to do. He wants to fulfill a campaign promise and see if he can bleed a stone dry.
I don't blame him. I actually concur right down the line with his thought process around this. That's one. Two, that the war didn't need to happen. It was provoked. It doesn't necessarily mean it was provoked by the Russians. There were all kinds of conversations back then about Ukraine joining NATO. The president has spoken about this. That didn't need to happen. It basically became a threat to the Russians. And so we have to deal with that fact. And those are real facts on the ground here. But be that as it may, the Russians have indicated that they are responsive to an end to this. There were very, very, what I'll call cogent and substantive negotiations framed in something that's called the Istanbul Protocol Agreement. We came very, very close to signing something. And I think we'll be using that framework as a guidepost to get a peace deal done between Ukraine and Russia. And I think that will be an amazing day. And the fact is, the president.
If we use that framework for peace between Ukraine and Russia, as it was, like the way it originally was designed, you're just asking for another war. I honestly do not believe that anybody could look at the Istanbul agreement and say, this can bring peace. If you know what's in there, which has, look, at the beginning when it was put out there, everybody and their mama used it to say, oh my God, the Ukrainians could have had peace, but the evil Westerners made them fight and die because they're evil and Boris Johnson is a fat piece of shit or something. That was the story, right? Then the actual agreement came out, and anybody with two brain cells said, oh, wait a second. Not only was this demanding land, not only was this saying Ukraine can't join alliances to deter Russian invasion, can't join NATO, giving up all that leverage for no concessions in return, but also Ukraine has to get rid of its armed forces. Ukraine really just can't have an army that's large enough to fight against the Russians if they invade them again. So you would disarm Ukraine, stop their ability to enter an alliance structure that could stop an invasion in the past, and give Russia land. Oh, as well as giving protection to the Russian language inside of Ukraine, et cetera, et cetera. Why wouldn't the Russians just invade again at the earliest opportunity if the Ukrainians tried to assert their sovereignty in any way the Russians didn't like, be it economic or otherwise? Isn't that issue where this all started back in 2014 in the first place? Would we not just be laying the foundations for another war? If you include the key parts of the Istanbul framework in this new framework, number one, I don't even know if the Ukrainians will accept it. I think there's a high likelihood they'll see the same problems I do, and they won't. And they might have to take the dark path of having to fight off the Russians with just the Europeans in tow, and we'll see how united they'll be. Or accept these concessions, get rid of its armed forces, and hope that the Russians won't invade a third time. This is less than undermining leverage. This is the type of stuff where it can almost only be described by maliciousness or such a lack of care that their interest is purely in just removing the United States.
The president understands how to get deals done. Deals only work, Jake, when they're good for all the parties. And that's the pathway that we're on here.
Of course, just a reminder of viewers.
Good for all the parties. How is it good for Ukraine? What concession has they ever been promised in any manner? We haven't heard any concessions to the Ukrainians. What concession? That's my only question from supporters. What concessions have the Ukrainians been given? They're not at the table. They have to give up land. They have to give up alliances. They have to give up. So you have to choose elections because of the Russians' democratic demands. Apparently, it's not a good deal for both sides. The Ukrainians are actively saying it's not a good deal for them. 91% of Ukrainians said that they don't want to take a deal where they're not at the table. They're not at the table.
Russia seized Ukrainian territory in 2014 with Crimea. They've been going into the Donbass region and seizing land in eastern Ukraine long before they attacked 3 years ago when they did the full frontal assault. You just suggested Russia was provoked. Trump is publicly attacking Zelensky as a dictator. He blamed him for starting the war in the first place, called for new elections in Ukraine, took NATO membership for Ukraine off the table. He said it's unlikely Ukraine will be able to get back its territory seized by Russia. Russian state TV suggests that President Trump is getting all of this straight from his conversations with President Putin. Take a listen.
Trump.
It's about time they started playing Solenyo for the Americoids on the couch. It's about time. It's about time they listen to the Russian media space. My goodness, taking my job away.
Отвечает на вопросы по поводу пресс-конференции.
When Trump is answering questions about the press conference, I think it is not a coincidence that many of the narratives that are being voiced largely materialized after their conversation.
Но фразы, которые он дает,
The phrases he is saying are so deep and so correct. They are in total alignment with the way we see things.
Do you think it's good that the Russians think that the Trump administration is in total alignment with the way that Putin sees things?
I think
And to be clear, that's Solenyev. That's like one of their top propagandists. That's not like just some podcaster.
had, Jake, by my estimation, almost 1.5 million deaths here. And finally, we
That's
have a
not
leader.
answering the question, you dumb schmuck. Answer the question.
That is President Trump, who is determined to end the carnage.
By the way, is it 500,000 deaths? Because Trump said it was millions. Either it was 4, 5, 7, 8, 9, who knows? The new number every time he says it. He spawns and respawns Ukrainian lives like it's nothing.
So the only way you're going to end the carnage is if you have a relationship with the leaders of both countries that are involved. I went over to Russia. I had a meeting.
Yeah, what? Yeah, take one, take the other, put them at the table, facilitate the conversation. What you've done is you've taken one, you go and you talk to them, you have a serious conversation with them, and then Ukraine finds out about it after. This is not, no, that's not the way that this is being done. You're negotiating with them the same way you negotiated with the Taliban. The ANA not at the table. How did that end?
With President Putin. It was a long meeting, positive, constructive. Lots of good things got discussed, in large part because the president enjoyed a positive relationship with President Putin from his first term in office. And that then evolved into a positive conversation with the president on a telephone call from the White House. And then there was a positive conversation with President Zelensky. So I think you've got to have these relationships. You've got to have communication. That's the only way you get.
So why is he calling Zelensky a dictator? Why is he calling Zelensky a dictator? Oh, we have to have a relationship. You have to be nice to them. Then you turn to Putin and you say, oh, you're glorious nation of World War II. You're so glorious, so amazing. Turn to Zelensky, you dictator. You're stealing all our money. You're greedy. And you turn back, oh, you're so That's how diplomacy works. Diplomacy is you get under the table and give them like a little support under there, while you turn to your ally and tell them to buzz off. Like that's not typically how I've seen negotiation done.
Deals done.
So President Trump wants President Zelensky to give the United States sweeping access to Ukraine's rare earth mineral deposits as repayment for all the aid the U.S. has given Ukraine. Zelensky rejected the original proposal. He suggests that Ukraine needs to get more assurances from the United States of future support and security guarantees. Where do these negotiations stand?
Well, Jake, let me say this with regard to the mineral rights agreement. The president came into office, and lo and behold, what did he find out? That we are the majority share of the aid to Ukraine.
Lie.
So we're funding it.
Lie.
We were funding it with no arrangement to pay it back.
Lie. A decent amount of it was, actually. Not all of it, not the majority of it, but a decent chunk of it. The recent aid package to Ukraine, the only reason it passed was because a decent portion of it was turned into a loan.
Alternatively, the Europeans, who were most affected by this war, were funding the minority share.
Lie.
And they had agreements to pay it back.
Also lie.
So, as is typical of the president...
They did have some agreements, but the way he suggested is like the majority of them were loans, which is not true.
He's very, very sensible. He said to himself, that makes no sense to me. Why would the...
Probably because it isn't true. That's why it makes no sense. It's because he made up something scary in his head. He made it up, and then he got scared of it. Yeah, of course it doesn't make sense. It's because he made it up.
The American public, taxpayers here, be funding the majority share, not get anything back. The Europeans funding the minority share.
That also assume. Look, they're talking about, oh, America's not getting anything out of this. Like, to them, deterrence is worthless. There's no such thing as deterrence. What's deterrence? It's this made-up fake thing a bunch of nerds talk about. Why? Because you can't put a price tag on it. If you can't put a price tag on it, then it's like, all these concepts that the Republican Party was supposed to be familiar with for decades and would lecture people on, all of a sudden, it's just poofed. Poofed.
They get everything back. So this agreement is much about repayment for all that we have done on behalf of the Ukrainian people. And that's the way the president sees it. I expect to see a deal signed this week.
Oh my God, man. It's so gross. Like, okay, we're going to give you $100 billion. You give us $500 billion plus all this critical infrastructure. And you take the deal we negotiate on your behalf. And yeah, you can't even be at the table. Sit at the kids' table while we negotiate the deal. And why? Hey, guys, I wonder why, like, Ukrainians' opinions on the United States is actively taking every single day. And we're taking a nation that genuinely, I would say, in large part, adored the United States, largely like the United States. We're turning them against us so quickly.
You saw President Zelensky waver in his commitment towards that a week ago. The president sent a message to him. He's not wavering anymore. I think there's a reason he's not wavering. It's because he realizes that we have done so much, and that agreement belongs being signed. And I think
it does. This is theft. What's being asked for in exchange for it's theft. It's theft. Like, if you just want to continue to talk to us, you have to give us half of your resources, your ports, your this, your that. And because we're just such nice guys, because you just fucking jerk us off. That's easy. He's saying, give us a handy under the table, and then afterwards we'll walk out of the room, and you'll just have to deal with the consequences. Like, if you get invaded by Russia, if you get invaded by Russia, like, there's no commitments here. All the Ukrainians are asking for is security commitments, or like more support, something in return. But if America promises more aid, that's going to piss off the Russians. And he doesn't want to piss off the Russians. We need to keep the Russians happy. We need to make sure Putin's happy and smiling so they can all go la-di-da-di-da, and Trump can pretend to be the peacemaker. And so, I mean, like, Ukrainians have to foot that bill. It's gross. Why don't we ever talk about it through the context of what the Ukrainians have done through us, through bleeding and dying, and making it so it's not us having to fight this with some other NATO state? I mean, we only talk about this in context of like, oh, we're going there to save them. You know, we're learning a lot from the Ukrainians. We take advantages from this too. Let's not pretend that the last 3 years were done completely out of the, like, kindness out of America's heart through moral virtue. There's a reason we're in Ukraine and not in Sudan.
You'll see it signed this week.
President Trump has been putting a lot of pressure on Ukrainian President Zelensky, as you just noted, and laying out the concessions Ukraine will have to make to end the war. What concessions will Russia have to make?
What a great question.
Well, I think in any peace deal, each side is going to make concessions, whether it's territorial concessions, whether it's economic concessions. I think there's a whole array of things that happen in a deal, and you'll see concessions from both sides, and that's the president's, that's what he does best. He brings people together.
You can't, come on, man. Can we just take this semi-seriously? Like, give like a few ideas of what could possibly be a concession instead of just using it as another opportunity to like wipe for him. Please, anything. Oh, I'm just supposed to like bet. Oh, they're gonna concede because Trump's he just brings people together. He's such a man of moral virtue. Like, I might as well just, it's nothing. This is all nothing.
He gets them to understand that the pathway to peace is concessions and consensus building. And I think you're going to see a very successful result here. We've been struggling with this conflict for 3.5 years. No different than Gaza.
3.5? Where the hell did a half come from? This was done like, this interview was yesterday. It was 3 years on the dot. He just made up 6 months just spawned out of nowhere.
The president has basically said to himself, we need something more purposeful. What we've been doing in the past has not worked. Now it's time to get something to work. And if we get something to work, then we're going to have a lot less we're going to have lives saved, and both peoples in both countries are going to leave.
Yeah, it's easy to say, you know what, I don't like this problem, so I'm just going to try to maybe like put a, there's a hole in the floor, maybe I'll put a rug over it, and we just walk around it. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of other ways to approach taking the problem than dealing with it in a way that might be somewhat expensive, but it's necessary to properly deal with the problem. You can't spend less and expect more. In most instances, you're going to have to invest more, and that means like putting your diplomatic capital and weight behind the Ukrainians for a good deal. Not just seeing if you just act like the biggest pussy on the planet, if the Russians will be kind enough to give you something that maybe you can get the Ukrainians, while strong-armed, to agree to.
Live in a better way.
The biggest difference, as I see it, between the two conflicts are that there's also this question of the European alliance when it comes to the Ukraine-Russia conflict. The front runner to be the next Chancellor of Germany, Friedrich Merz, warned European leaders that they must, quote, prepare for the possibility that Donald Trump will no longer uphold NATO's mutual defense commitment unconditionally. That's part of the NATO pact. An attack on one is an attack on all. You're a close advisor to President Trump, a close friend of his. If Russia attacked a NATO ally, would President Trump honor the United States' commitment under Article 5 to defend allies in NATO?
I think the president has never said anything of the sort. I think what he said is that NATO exists.
It's such an easy question. Will he defend NATO countries if they're attacked? Is the basic Article 5. This right here is how you get World War III. I'm not fucking with you. This right here, for all the people who are fear-mongering about World War III, this is how you get World War III. You make the Russians think you don't care about an alliance because you want to just like show how cool because you believe that the best way to negotiate is strong arm and fear. The Russians believe you don't care, so they take it to heart. They attack Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. You're then pushed into a crisis where the public are asking you to act, calling you like Moscow Donald or wherever. Your popularity's down. And he's like, shit, I got to do something. And so then you act. And then the Russians got in over their head because they thought the Americans weren't going to be there, but now they are. And now now the situation spiraled out of control because the Russians don't understand our interests. The Russians don't understand our intentions. And that's where a lot of conflict comes from. It's come from the misunderstanding of another's intentions, where somebody builds up a defensive power that could also be offensive. So you assume it's offensive. So you build up power. So then they build up power in response to your buildup of power, et cetera, et cetera. And so if Trump pulls back and Putin pushes forward, and then Trump is forced to push back, that's how you create a confrontation. When you can't answer a question like this clearly, you make conflict in Europe more likely. Because you bring the cost of conflict in Europe down in the minds of those who calculate these decisions.
The U.S. has always supported NATO, that we've supported it by funding more money than the European countries have in the past, and yet he continues, or Americans continue to be criticized for not standing up. I just don't understand the rationale behind that.
So Friedrich,
we've done more than most. Yeah, I just think it's unfair.
It's unfair. He didn't answer the question.
Actually.
Jake Tapper, come on. Jakey boy. Ay, ay, ay. They were talking about German elections, though. Do you guys want to stop by Germany and talk about the election outcomes? 9? Ah.